Hi guys, we are not stopping, another video coming up. So now we're gonna explore Azure App Service deployment slots. So this is a powerful tool that enables preview, manage, test, and deploy different development environments. And explore staging environments under deployment slots. So deployment slots are available on standard, premium, and isolated. So free, shared, and basics technically do not have this. Deployment slots leave live apps with their own host names. Live apps with their own host names. Deployment slots help with uh, sorry, validating app before releasing to production users, right? So with a deployment slot, we can do the validations that we need on the app before we actually release to production users. The deployment slots eliminates downtime since traffic redirection is seamless and no requests are dropped between the swap. So when we're swapping from our production and staging environment deployment slots, because the swap is seamless, you don't have any downtime or you don't have any traffic being dropped as similar to when an app service has to restart and all those fun things. So all of that restart and all of that steps or process actually has taken place in the staging environment already. Hence why we don't have that. Uh, During the swap, the slot that had new instance will contain the previous production app for easier rollback should the need arise. So if you remember one of the videos where I explained this, I said the staging environment will become what you call prod environment in some way. So essentially what happens is the content of the two are swapped, but then during that swap, you technically do not get a downtime and you'd get your previous production in now your staging environment. So should there be an issue after doing the swap, you can easily revert back and have your previous production setup going on. No additional charges for using deployment slots. Deployment slot limits are specific to app service limits that depend on a tier. So there's no limits to the deployment slots that you can have. The deployment slots are limited as per the pricing tier limits that you have on what do you call app services. Call examine slot swapping. So this is us going into the process of how do we swap the slots. So step one, we apply settings from the target slot to the source slot. So target slot will be our production, source slot will be our staging. So things like connection string and slot specific settings, continuous deployment settings if enabled, app service authentication settings if enabled. Those are the things that we start applying on the target slot from the source slot. Wait for every instance in the source slot to complete the restart. So the source slot, which is currently the instance that we have in the staging environment, wait for the complete restart of the app service and all of that. Swap operation reverts all changes to the source slot and stops its operation if source restart fails. So if we fail to restart after doing the applying the target settings to the source slot, then we effectively stop the whole process. If local cache is enabled, trigger HTTP request to on root with a / on each instance. Local cache initialization causes another restart on each instance. If auto swap, okay, let's take note of that. If local cache is enabled, trigger HTTP request on root on each instance, right? Local cache initialization causes another restart on each instance. If AutoSwap is enabled with custom warmup, the application gets triggered by the HTTP request to application root. If the instance returns a HTTP response, it is considered warmup, right? That's for AutoSwap. We can configure something called an AutoSwap. If warmed up, swap slots to production slot. Then here's a list of settings that change when doing a swap versus those that are not changing. So I'm just gonna quickly read down the list of settings that aren't changing. So settings that aren't changing, we have publishing endpoints, custom domain names, non-public certificates, and TSL or SSL settings, scale settings, web job schedules, IP restrictions, always on, diagnostic log settings, cross origin resource sharing or course. Then for settings that are swapped, we have Azure Content Delivery Network, service endpoints, virtual network integration, hybrid connection, web job content, public certificates, handler mapping, connection strings, can be configured to stick to the slot if you wanted to. App settings can, most of them can also be uh, configured to stick to slot. Then general settings such as framework version, if you are using a 32-bit, also the bitness, the WebSocket settings as well, uh, those are swapped. Then check the deployment slot setting if you do not want the settings to be changed by the slot. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here to say uh, make them stick to slot essentially. Swap deployment slot. To swap deployment slot manually, first click on the swap and select the source and target slot on the swap dialog. If you want to see how the app is going to run with the target slot settings, select the swap and preview. So you have an option to actually preview to close the dialog when happy. Swap with preview provides a new URL to access the preview instance of your app service after phase one of swap completes. Once happy with the preview, click on complete swap. Right? When auto swap is enabled, downtime is eliminated. Code gets deployed into staging slot for warm up, then swapped into production slot automatically after swap. After swap, well, it should say warm up maybe. NB auto swap is not currently supported in web apps on Linux. Okay, that is not supported for Linux. It's an interesting fact. We can define custom warm-up actions using a web config or application initialization to be completely to be completed before swap happens. So we have custom warm-up actions essentially that we can use. Then deployment slot information is logged on activity log. So you can track if it from there. For rollbacks of the target and source slots again. Cool. So we can use activity log, uh, activity log, so you can track it from there. So you can use activity logs to see deployment slot information. So then here we have another topic that talks about how to route traffic in app service. By default, all traffic is routed to the deployment slot. Can route the portion of traffic into the staging slot. So here probably we wanted to say by default it is rerouted to the production deployment slot. You can route a portion of the traffic into the staging deployment slot to get feedback before major release. So this is more like it's taking a portion of production users and sending it through a configuration, sending it to a staging slot. Then once client is routed to a non-production slot, all the requests from the client will be redirected to the non-product slot for the entire session. So if you are being routed to a staging slot, you'll access it all the way until you end your session, essentially. The slot a client is pinned to can be seen using the XMS routing name cookie saved on the client side. So there's a cookie with that particular name that basically tells you where the user is routed, either deployment slot or the staging slot or the production slot, essentially. So that's an example there that shows how to route or how a user is routed to the staging for non-prod. Then for prod, it specifies it at self. Instead of staging, it says self there. So that's something to take note of. Traffic can be routed manually by adding that as a query param with the ability to switch to production app. This is useful for testing beta releases. So you can put this thing as a query param on a URL, then route users manually to your what do you call staging slot. So if you know Azure portal, it has a preview.azure da 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 da. Potentially you could do something like that if you wanted to have a preview without having the URL change or anything like that. Just add that variable to your query param and it routes the user to the staging slot and they can see whatever that's in the staging slot. Okay, cool. Then by default, non-prod slot they have 0% traffic. This enables using testing capability. Enables using testing or testing beta capability of this feature. Coolio. Happiness. That's that. Fun fact, because I'm using the Microsoft free subscription for the month, so what I tried doing there is I created uh, this thing allows me. I created that app service there. Then where you see deployment slots is essentially on this particular tab. So you can see there's a swap there, there's logs and all of that. But then I can't do that because I need to upgrade to standard or upwards. So remember, free shared basics do not support deployment slots. Julio, thank you very much, guys.